Nearly everyone knows the Flying Scotsman, the first steam engine to reach 100 miles an hour. But that claim to fame is shared by another locomotive, 3440 City of Truro. Unlike Flying Scotsman, City of Truro's record wasn't done in an official manner, so a debate has sprung up about its authenticity. In spite of this, the record has led to the engine being one of the most popular on Britain's railways, returning to steam 3 times, once pulling regular service passenger trains. It was present for the naming of British Railway's final steam engine, went abroad to the Netherlands, and during its last time in steam was the oldest engine working on Britain's main lines. This is the history of 3440 City of Truro. In 1902 saw George Jackson Churchward become Chief Mechanical Engineer of the Great Western Railway. One of his early goals was to introduce a set of boilers that could be used across different engines to ease maintenance. A standard No. 4 boiler was tested on an express locomotive at Borough Class 3405 Mauritius, with the success being enough for a batch of 10 engines to be built to the design at Swindon Works. The first engine, 3433 City of Bath, was completed in March of 1903, with the other 9 following in May. The 11 engines of this design were designated the City class, with the 10 new builds each named after a city on the Great Western network. 3440 City of Truro was the 8th of the batch, built at a cost of £1,957. From the beginning it was special, being the 2000th locomotive built at Swindon Works. The class was put to work pulling services from London's Paddington Station to Plymouth, such as the Cornish Riviera Limited and the Ocean Mails. Although 1902 had seen the introduction of the larger and more modern Saint class, the Cities were still prestigious engines. In July, just 4 months after its introduction, City of Bath was given the privilege of pulling a royal train. 3 royal saloon coaches were attached to the Cornish Riviera Limited, with future King George V on board. The engine, despite its added load, was able to average 63 miles an hour, reaching a peak of 81, and arrived at Plymouth 37 minutes early. It was clear from early on the City class was built for speed, but no one expected what they were really capable of. At this time, Plymouth Harbour was operated not only by the GWR, but also by the London South Western Railway, with a rivalry having developed between the two for their London-bound services. The GWR's player in this game was the Ocean Mails, an express post train. Mail, and sometimes gold bullion, would be unloaded from USA liners bound for mainland Europe. The train would then run across the hilly terrain to London, with a single stop at Bristol for northbound mail, loaded in a separate van to be uncoupled. Speed was key. Engines waited on standby across the route in case something went wrong. On the 9th of May 1904, German liner Kronprinz Wilhelm was unloaded. No gold was on board, but 4 coaches of mail were filled for London, with a 5th for Bristol. The train was to be pulled by 3440 City of Truro, driven by Moses Clements. Also on the footplate was journalist Charles Rue Martin. He had started the British Locomotive Practice and Performance article of Railway magazine in 1901, taking records of timings on different services. He was well respected, even having been invited to record City of Bath's royal train the year prior. He had recorded the Ocean Mails before, but this was to be one to remember. The train set off at 9:23, passing through the busy station and out onto the main line. Here City of Truro was able to reach speeds of almost 80 miles an hour, but inclines also slowed the engine down. By Exeter St David's, the train was averaging 55 miles an hour, lower than prior recordings. But following was the run spotlight, Wellington Bank. Wellington Bank's gradient ranges between 1 in 80 and 1 in 90, a steep incline for an engine. After leaving Exeter, Clements was able to climb to Whiteball Tunnel at a speed of 60 miles an hour. Rue Martin was ready with his stopwatch when they burst out of the tunnel, counting the time between the quarter mile posts. 11 seconds, 10.6, 10.2, 10, 9.8, 9.4, 9.2, 8.8. That time would mean the train was travelling at a speed of 102.3 miles an hour, making City of Truro the first engine to beat 100 miles an hour. It may have been able to hold the speed for longer, and perhaps silence later debates about its authenticity, but plate layers were seen on the line ahead, forcing Clements to slow down. When the train stopped at Bristol, it was determined City of Truro didn't have enough coal to reach London, so 3065 Duke of Connaught was substituted, leaving less than 4 minutes after 3440's arrival. It too reached impressive speeds, travelling at an average of 71 miles an hour, arriving in Paddington at 1 in the afternoon. Although a tremendous feat, the Great Western Railway denied the publishing of the speed record, only allowing the overall timings of the train. At the time, 80 miles an hour was considered high, and the railway was concerned its reputation for safety would be in jeopardy. Despite this caution, the story managed to leak to 2 Plymouth newspapers, who reported an engine reaching between 99 and 100 miles an hour on Wellington Bank the next day. In 1905, Rue Martin confirmed the speed reached, and in 1908 named the engine as City of Truro, although these would not be confirmed by the Great Western until 1922. Yet for all this initial caution, City of Truro's speed record has had many doubters over the years, and is not recognised as the first to officially surpass 100 miles an hour. And not without reason, for it would not be until 30 years later that 4472 Flying Scotsman would earn that honour. One of the major factors of doubt is Rue Martin and his method of recording. Most speed attempts utilised a dynamometer coach, which would accurately record speed, but all Rue Martin had was a stopwatch. As such, human error could have affected the results, in spite of Rue Martin's prestige in that field. There is also the fact that no other engine was recorded at speed until Flying Scotsman, which is a much more powerful locomotive than City of Truro. The gradient would likely have had a major effect on the speed, however. Wellington Bank reaches 1 in 80, over twice as steep as Stoke Bank at 1 in 178, where Flying Scotsman achieved its record. Other factors raise doubts or act in favour of City of Truro's claim to fame, and while studies show the engine would have been able to exceed 100 miles an hour, it is impossible to know for certain if it did. Whatever the case, Clements, Rue Martin and anyone else on board the train would have undoubtedly been some of the fastest people on the planet when City of Truro made its lightning descent of Wellington Bank. Afterwards, life continued as normal for the City class. In 1906 they were repainted along with the rest of the Great Western Fleet, with the railway's name written on the tenders and the chassis painted in black instead of red. The class would gain 9 new members between February of 1907 and December of 1908, as more Atbara-class engines were converted into cities, making a total of 20 engines in the class. Between 1910 and 1912, the boilers were given superheating to improve efficiency, extending their smoke boxes. 3440 was refitted in September of 1911, and by that time had also been given a classic Great Western copper chimney cap. In December of 1912, the railway's 440 locomotives were renumbered, with the cities becoming 3710 through 3719, with City of Truro going from number 3440 to 3717. It worked like this for the next 20 years, by which time the class had been demoted. City of Truro was working local trains from Shrewsbury when the first of the class was withdrawn. 3718 City of Winchester was taken out of service in October of 1927. And by 1931 only City of Truro and 3712 City of Bristol were still in service. Given City of Truro's legacy, many believed it should be preserved, but the Great Western didn't want to pay the expense. Charles Collett, who had succeeded the role of Chief Mechanical Engineer from Churchwood in 1922, approached the London North Eastern Railway about taking the engine. They agreed to display it in their York Museum, which was much smaller than the modern National Railway Museum. Although the GWR didn't consider the engine to be of outstanding importance, their deal still stipulated that City of Truro should remain at their disposal if they wished to use it in the future. City of Truro was withdrawn in March and moved to York. City of Bristol would be withdrawn in May, leaving City of Truro as the only preserved member of the class. 3717 had travelled 1,483 miles in service. In 1948, the railways were nationalised under the government and became British Railways, with the GWR becoming the Western region. The region's heritage was still taken advantage of, particularly by Reginald F. Hanks, who became the region's chairman in 1955. The region had the most engines painted in BR's green livery, and many coaches were painted in the Great Western's old chocolate and cream colours. In 1953, the Eastern region had re-steamed two of its museum locomotives, number 251 and 990 Henry Oakley, to celebrate the centenary of Doncaster Works, and the Western region decided to follow suit in January of 1957. Hanks had City of Truro removed from the York Museum and restored at Crewe. Work was made easier thanks to Churchwood's number 4 boiler still being in use. Due to a pannier tank engine at Pontypool Road using the number 3717, City of Truro was given its old number of 3440 and painted in its original livery to match. The engine was back in steam by March and pulled its first excursion on the 30th. The train was for the Festiniog Railway Preservation Society, going from Paddington to Ruabon and back. Unlike the two Eastern region engines, City of Truro was not just used on specials. The engine was based at Didcot and pulled regular services on the Newbury and Southampton line. On April 23rd, pulling a special from Pontypridd to Swindon, City of Truro reached a speed of 80 miles an hour. The engine would turn to Wellington Bank on May 19th, travelling between Swindon and Kingsware. On the return journey, pulling 8 coaches, the train reached a speed of 83 miles an hour. July 2nd saw City of Truro pull a train to Llanelli, but when going to refuel, its high cab roof struck the coal stage, causing damage to it and the cab sides. Repairs were done quickly at Carefully Works, with 3440 returning to Swindon on the 5th. On the 15th of September, the engine would pass through its namesake, Truro, when pulling a Plymouth to Penzance special. In summer of 1958, the engine began to see use on the Reading to Paddington semi-fast service. In autumn, 3440 was relocated to Swindon and began working semi-fast trains to Bristol. City of Truro would appear in the Railway series this year, pulling a rail tour to Sodor in Duck and a diesel engine. In April of 1959, City of Truro attended the Scottish Industrial Fair at Glasgow's Kelvin Hall. 2 other engines brought out of retirement, Jones Goods number 103 and Caledonian Single number 123, were also at the event, alongside 62469 Glenn Douglas and 62271 Gordon Highlander. Between the 3rd and the 19th, engines would be selected every day to doublehead specials from Glasgow to Montrose or Aberdeen. On the 18th of March 1960, British Railways held a naming ceremony for its final steam engine, 92220 Evening Star. City of Truro was in attendance at the Swindon Works event, alongside the Caledonian Single. As Evening Star entered service, 3440 and 123 would be displayed at Bristol, Taunton, Birmingham and Paddington. 1961 would see the first model of City of Truro released, although it would be a buildable kit from Kitmaster rather than a motorised engine. Unfortunately, this year also marked the end of City of Truro's second time in service. On the 29th of January, 3440 pulled its final rail tour to Plymouth to promote the opening of Westwood Television. Although a part of the National Collection, City of Truro would remain in the Western region. The Swindon Railway Museum would open on the 24th of June, with exhibits like 4003 Lodestar and 2516 Dean Goods. After cosmetic restoration to its 3717 livery, City of Truro would join them in April of 1962. Although no longer in steam, City of Truro's presence was still felt by the region. For the 60th anniversary of its record run, and as the swan song of the Castle class, an excursion was held along the Ocean Mails route. 4 castles were assigned to the return train, with the first leg from Paddington pulled by 4073 Pendennis Castle. This was the last time steam engines in the region were allowed to run at high speeds, and so the best Welsh coal was used, with 4073 reaching a speed of 96 miles an hour. However, sparks were seen coming from beneath the tender, and it was found the high heat had caused the fire bars to collapse. The engine was able to make it to Westbury, where modified Hall Class 6999 Capel Derwy Hall brought it onto Taunton for the first planned swap over. 7025 Sudeley Castle brought the train to Plymouth without incident, and 7029 Clun Castle started the return journey. It was able to reach over 90 miles an hour before Wellington Bank, but an 80 miles an hour speed restriction was in place on the stretch of track 3440 had achieved its record. From Bristol, the train was taken over by 5054 Earl of Ducie, which took the train back to Paddington. By 1965, the Western region had become the first part of British Railways to stop using steam engines. City of Truro spent the next 20 years in the Swindon Museum, but as before, the engine's prestige gave it another chance on the main line, this time for the 150th anniversary of the Great Western Railway. The original idea for Swindon's museum was to bring 2 locomotives back into action, City of Truro and 4003 Lodestar. Preliminary investigations found Lodestar's firebox and wheels would need complete overhaul to return to work, but City of Truro could be restored within reasonable expense. On the night of July 10th, 1984, Farringdon Road was closed and the museum's front window removed, freeing the engine to be winched onto a lorry. It was put back onto the railway at Swindon Works, but had to be taken to the Severn Valley Railway for its overhaul, arriving at Bridgnorth Shed on the 14th of July. City of Truro was kept intact until September, giving it a chance to be on display for the Preservation Railways Enthusiast Weekend. In October, the engine began being dismantled, but not before being repainted, into British Railways black. Obviously, none of the class had survived into BR ownership, so the livery was inauthentic, just the thing rail fans can get upset about. It was all for an April Fool's joke, with an article released in Steam Railway magazine the following April, even going as far as to lament that a double funnel and smoke deflectors were not approved. As such, only one side of the engine was painted. Other colour schemes proposed included BR Express Blue or as James the Red Engine. Nonetheless, the engine only wore the livery for 2 days, and was painted back into its classic 1904 livery. The original plan saw City of Truro being worked on alongside 7819 Hinton Manor, but the latter engine's first rail tour was brought forward by 3 months, forcing 3440's restoration to pause. It wasn't until 3rd of September the engine would be re-steamed, running from Kidderminster to Gloucester and being approved for mainline duties. Its official first public appearance would be at the Enthusiasts Weekend on the 28th and 29th, 1 year after its final public showcase, but some got to ride behind it much earlier. The engine was being tested on the 5th, and ended up being substituted on a service up the line, justified as simply giving it a run. The 25th of October saw the engine's first mainline train, going from Gloucester to Newport. In an attempt to limit line-side photographers, the train was announced to be happening in the West Country, but the route was leaked and many gathered to witness the engine's return. While the year saw many Great Western engines operating across the country, the main event at Swindon Works was cancelled. This was to be a showcase of engines, including City of Truro, but feelings were soured when British Railways announced the following year would see the closure of the works, with over 2,000 workers going on strike at the sudden announcement. Nonetheless, City of Truro was back in steam and making an impression. It was based at the Severn Valley Railway until autumn of the following year, pulling trains along the line in addition to mainline excursions. One of these would be a double-header worked with 6000 King George V, taking a train from Shrewsbury to Hereford, where it was taken over by 4029 Cloncarsle. City of Truro was based at the National Railway Museum in York until 1989, after which it returned to Didcot. While here, it pulled a double-header alongside 3217 Earl of Berkeley, the only other surviving outside frame Great Western 440. However, arrangements were being made for the city to travel much further afield, abroad to mainland Europe. 1989 was the 150th anniversary of railways in the Netherlands, and Dutch railways were going all out in celebration. Engines from other countries were invited, with 4468 Mallard as the initial goal for the UK visitor. Instead, the National Railway Museum offered City of Truro, which was sent out on a ferry from Sheerness Docks on the 12th of June. Between the 22nd of June and the 6th of August, a festival was held in Utrecht, with a parade of engines passing through the station every morning and evening. City of Truro only stayed in the Netherlands for 6 weeks, returning to the UK in the middle of July. 1990 saw the Great Hall of the National Railway Museum closed for roof renovations, so the exhibits were moved to the former Swindon Works for display, an event titled the NRM on tour. City of Truro would return here when not pulling rail tours, sometimes on display inside and other times in steam outside. In 1991, City of Truro visited the Severn Valley Railway for the filming of Howard's End, a movie set in the early 20th century, starring Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. The NRM's Great Hall was reopened in April of 1992, with City of Truro, 6229 Duchess of Hamilton and 4771 Green Arrow in steam between the 15th and the 20th to celebrate. Not long after, on the 2nd of May, City of Truro pulled its last mainline rail tour, travelling from Derby to Paddington. This was originally its penultimate service, but low booking numbers led to the 10th May train being cancelled. Still, only a few weeks later, between the 15th and the 25th, it would be on display in front of Truro Cathedral for the city's Edwardian Festival, even being in steam over the weekends. The next few years would see City of Truro in operation at the National Railway Museum and on Heritage Railways, before full withdrawal in 1995, being put on display in the Great Hall. 2004 was the centenary of City of Truro's 100 miles an hour run, and the natural way to celebrate was to have the engine back in steam again. 2001 saw Steam Railway magazine start an appeal for £40,000 towards the engine's restoration, and in only 3 weeks £16,000 had been raised. If there were any doubts about if City of Truro's return would be a success, they had definitely been put to rest. The engine's restoration was done at the Dean Forest Railway's Flour Mill workshop, with some work done at the NRM's workshops, with the final cost coming to £130,000. Like before, its first train preceded its official launch. It was brought to the Gloucester-Warwickshire Railway for its return on April 2, 2004 at a private reception, but was used on a service up the line the day before. For the anniversary of its record run, 3 special trains were pulled. The 8th and 10th saw City of Truro pulling the Ocean Mail 100 rail tour from Bristol to Kingswear, passing over Wellington Bank. On the 9th, 3440 is at the Paignton and Dartmouth Steam Railway, pulling special trains along the route. The month ended with City of Truro attending York's Railfest 2004, which saw it in steam alongside the other first engine to go 100 miles an hour, Flying Scotsman, which had just been purchased by the museum. City of Truro pulled visitor trains on the demonstration line, with engines like the Festiniog Railway's Prince and a replica of Stephenson's Rocket also giving rides. The rest of the year was spent as the last restoration, visiting heritage railways and pulling mainline excursions, such as a train from Plymouth to Truro on November 13th. An end-of-year special was pulled on December 29th, travelling from Tyseley to Leamington Spa, but this would be its last time on the main line due to the engine's lack of modern safety features. After this, it was based at the Gloucester-Warwickshire Railway, making visits to other heritage lines over the decade. In 2010, to celebrate the 175th anniversary of the Great Western Railway, the engine was repainted into its 1906 livery, complete with number 3717. Between May 1st and 10th, it was present at Didcot, alongside other Great Western engines. However, things would change for the worse in 2011, when City of Truro started to show signs of struggling. When visiting the Bodmin and Wenford Railway in September, the engine failed and had to be taken out of service. While awaiting a decision on its future, the engine was put on display at the Shildon Railway Museum. Railfest 2012 would see City of Truro back in steam, once again giving rides on the museum's demonstration line. It seemed like the engine was back, but in reality this would be City of Truro's final stint in steam. A hole had been found in the boiler tubes, and while retubing had been considered, it was ultimately decided it would be better to return the engine to static display immediately, rather than work it further and have to give it cosmetic and mechanical restoration. The news was released through Steam Railway magazine in March 2013, a bittersweet end to the engine's return. City of Truro was initially put on static display in the Great Hall, but in 2015 it returned to Swindon for exhibition at the Steam Museum, opened in 2000. And based in one of the old Swindon Works buildings. This would mark the last time City of Truro was moved, as it remains in the museum today, and celebrated its 120th anniversary in 2023. City of Truro has had a long journey, but it is without doubt a special engine. Starting life as the 2000th engine built at Swindon, it made its mark by, reputedly, becoming the first steam engine to reach 100 miles an hour. And whether that is accurate or not, that prestige has stayed with it for over 100 years. It was spared the cutter's torch, brought back into revenue-earning service, restored for the Great Western's 150th anniversary, and of course returned for the record centenary, with railfans raising almost half its goal restoration costs in less than a month. During its last restoration, it was the oldest locomotive running on Britain's main lines. Some believe that its advanced age means we won't see it return again, but I don't doubt its popularity will bring this iconic locomotive back into steam at some point in the future.